Welcome everyone to the Simio Solution Series. Today's session is going to be on periodic statistics. I am Dan Vasilini, the VP of Global Sales here at Simio. Doing most of the talking is going to be Katie Ifkovitz. There's Katie, smiling face on the screen. So she will show up here in a second. Katie will be doing most of the talking today, but before we get started, from a few housekeeping items perspective, today's session is being recorded for replay purposes. If you want to go back and watch this session or refer it on to a colleague or a friend, it will be live on simio.com, or it'll be recorded on simio.com pretty soon after we finish the session. Usually we have it up on the website within about a 24-hour period, so it'll be up there. If there are any models or anything that we share today on the session that we are going to share and have available for you, they will also be on the web page for you to download there. Please be aware, coming into the session, you are on mute, and you will remain on mute for the entire session just to avoid any background noise and things like that. If you do have questions, there is a question/chat area in the GoToWebinar dashboard. You should see that. It's on my right side of the screen, depending if you've moved it, might be around your screen somewhere. But that's there is an area in there that you can ask questions. You type them in. If the question is relevant or pertinent to something that Katie's talking about, we will talk about it, or we'll jump right into it at that point in time. If it is something that is, sorry, my screen just went on pause. Anyway, if it's something that is relevant to the session or the topic that Katie's on, we'll interrupt her. If it is something that is not per the section, we will address it at the end. Our session is scheduled to last about 60 minutes today. We have left time at the end for question and answer, so hopefully we do get some questions during this session today. Make sure for some reason my screen will not advance because it's saying I'm paused. Give me 1 second. Let me figure out what my technical difficulty is here. Nope. All right, well, I am stuck on my screen. It will not let me advance. Let me tell you what our upcoming sessions are, and then Katie, I'll turn it over to you. So maybe at the end, I'll bring our upcoming sessions schedule on for you. We've got 3 more sessions on the calendar right now: June 30th, July 14th, July 28th. Our next session, June 30th, it's best practices for modeling labor. That'll be same time on a Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time, and then the next 2 scheduled for the 14th and 28th of July. In regards to beyond July, we are currently kind of fiddling with our schedule based upon knowing that August is sometimes a holiday or a vacation month, and then also kids going back to school, things like that. So we may just do 1 session in the month of August, and then get back to our 2 monthly sessions in September or October. We will have that schedule out shortly, though. But as for right now, we are scheduled for 3 more sessions the next 3 Thursdays, next alternating Thursdays from here on out. I will go ahead and end there because I can't advance my slides. Katie, if you want to grab control and start to roll, you are good to go. You're muted.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, perfect. Good to go.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. Today's Simio Solution Series is on periodic statistics and how we can generate meaningful time-based results for systems that might vary over time. And my name is Katie Ifkovitz, and I am a product engineer here at Simio. And now that I've introduced myself, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off. So periodic statistics are basically just a statistic where you can generate data only for a specific period of time, whether it's hourly, based on shifts, day, work days, month, year, etc. But they work very, very similarly to our other statistic types, but they can generate really meaningful results. So in order to kind of show that, my agenda today is just to do an overview of the model and kind of the objective that I'll be using to kind of go through periodic statistics. And then I'm going to kind of start backwards and show the results and dashboards you can create using these periodic statistics, and then we'll go and show how to implement them from the beginning, and then just end on some additional capabilities and kind of an overview, and then I'll leave time for questions at the end. So the framework for this talk is using the hospital emergency department example model that Simio has and that anyone can access. I think it's a really good framework because a lot of people generally, unfortunately, understand kind of an emergency department and how the arrivals kind of vary over time throughout the day. In this model, to keep it a little bit simpler, we're going to just have a constant staff level throughout the day, but they are split into different shifts, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m., 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and then 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. So we have 3 8-hour shifts, but again, it's kind of a constant workload. And the objective that we're thinking about and creating these statistics and that kind of this analysis is assessing the performance of this emergency department at both current and potentially proposed staffing levels. And I will say that we chose the hospital emergency department as the example and the framework for this, but periodic statistics can be beneficial in pretty much any industry or application because it just has to do with how your system might vary at different periods of time. So whether it's by hour or by day, week, month, year, pretty much every system has some variability component, whether it's demand or staffing, resourcing, targets, any type of system. So this is just the framework, but these are generally applicable to any type of system. So again, kind of the objective that we're working with is how the emergency department is performing throughout the day. A few different questions that kind of guide this objective are, are the different workloads balanced throughout the different shifts, throughout a shift? Are all the shifts performing at the same levels, meeting the targets that are determined? And should shift-based scheduling with different amounts of staff or resourcing in general be considered? So those are kind of the questions that I want you to keep in mind. And since we're talking about statistics, here are some of the key performance indicators that we'll be talking about. And you'll notice that we're looking at output statistics, one example being patients discharged, tally statistics as in time of in system, so total time, or length of stay in sort of a treatment area, so not including any waiting time. And then state statistics, the one we're using is number of beds and rooms occupied. And then also for our objects, for our 2 different staffing types, nurses and doctors, we'll look at the function for scheduled utilization. Because the thing about periodic statistics that's important is that they are connected to the other types of statistics that already exist. So I'll show how they work in all of the types. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and go over to Simio. And I want to make sure, Dan, that you can see Simio up on the screen.
Yep, everything looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so again, we're looking at this hospital emergency department example model. And the purpose of today's talk is not about the example model itself. This is just to guide this. So if you have specific questions or want to learn more about how the model actually functions, I recommend looking in Simio support or Simio help for the information on the example model, or kind of playing with it with the model yourself. But this is more about the statistics themselves. I did make a few changes, and we can provide the model that I made, but it mostly operates the same way, just with a few different things to make our kind of topic more meaningful. Really, the most important thing to do with this model, we can see that patients are arriving either through the waiting room or from a ambulance. But really what's important is that we have a time varying arrival rate. So we use that using a rate table, and you can kind of just look at it and see that the rate ranges from 2 per hour all the way up to 11 per hour. So just looking at this gives me an indication that there is some sort of time variability that might mean that periodic statistics could be beneficial in answering some of those questions that I established as part of the objective. And like I said, I'm actually going to kind of go backwards, and I'm going to talk about experiments first so that you can have a sense on what periodic statistics are capable of. But first, in a normal analysis, if I were not using periodic statistics, I would just have my general state tally output statistics in an experiment, and I ran it for a week. But you have your average time in system across the entire week. And let's say for this emergency department, the target is to be under 9/10 of an hour. So patients come in and depart within an hour, which is an awesome target. This is a very high performing emergency room for any of those who have unfortunately been to one. That's probably not what you're looking at, but this one is very high performing and wants to maintain that performance. So if our target's 9/10 of an hour, we look at this total average time in system, and we know that 3 nurses and 3 doctors is not enough to reach that target, but 4 nurses and 3 doctors is enough. I'm looking at this data. And then we can pull out the other statistics and kind of do some analysis. But again, I know that the time that the arrival rates are varied throughout the day. So this isn't really giving me all the information I might need, especially considering the questions for this that I proposed, like how to look at the shifts and across the day to see how it's performing. So I took these same statistics and made them into periodic statistics. First, looking at a period just being a shift. So 8 hours. We have the first shift, second shift, and third shift. And so if we have the same experiment, except now we have these 3 shifts, comparing the average time in system, again, we decided that the 3 nurses and 3 doctors was not enough to hit our target across for an entire day for the whole week. But when you pull out this shift periodic statistic, we can see that maybe for that first shift from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m., 3 doctors and 3 nurses is enough because we are hitting that target. But for the 4 nurses and 3 doctors case in shift 3, it isn't enough. So I just wanted to point out here that now we can really dig into the performance of the system based on these 3 designated shifts, and pull it out into my response results just like I would a regular statistic. And so I can look just like that at these response results in the SMORE plot. So I can look at whether or not I think that they're statistically significant and look at the histogram and all of that kind of information. And just like other statistics, I can make dashboards of this data. So if we're looking at this 8-hour shift, and I can filter between the 3 different staffing scenarios, we have our average length of stay, which is, again, another tally statistic. But we can also look at this nurse and doctor scheduled utilization. And it looks like the 3 shifts are pretty balanced, at least in this scenario, and the workload is balanced between the nurse and doctor. When we shift to the 4-3, we see more workload falls on the doctor, which kind of makes sense. But again, it looks like these shifts are pretty balanced. Maybe shift 3 has a little bit more. And before, if I wasn't using periodic statistics, it might not be too difficult to get this information. We only have 3 different shifts using timers and elements and all of that kind of stuff. But let's say I wanted to dig in deeper and I wanted to look at these same statistics, but across each hour chunk. So I want 24 periods of 1 hour each. And I want to see, yes.
Just real quick, a question popped in And they are asking what the objective is. And I think you covered that at the beginning, but just for that person's knowledge, could you just discuss the objective again of this?
Yeah, so the objective is to look at a emergency department and kind of assess the performance of different staffing levels throughout the day. And assessing the performance, meaning hitting targets for length of stay and time and system, as well as kind of workload balancing across the shifts using periodic statistics.
Perfect, thank you. Hope that addresses the question that was asked out there.
Yep, no problem. But so like I was saying, we can use these same statistics that we already made, but look at it for a shorter period of time, 1 hour, and 24 periods throughout the day. So if I want to look at our hourly utilization for both our nurses in green and our doctors in this maroon color, we kind of have learned a lot more about the pattern that's happening inside of these shifts, that sometimes we're as low as 40% utilized, but sometimes, multiple times, in at least in all 3 shifts, we get up between 80 and 90, and sometimes above 90%. So this is giving us significantly more information about, is this staffing, staffing set up enough or correct? And then, again, we can use the filters to look at the different staffing configurations. And again, I'm not attempting to answer the question and solve this hypothetical model and provide a staffing model. I'm just trying to show through this framework of how we would use periodic statistics in order to do that. So again, this is looking at the average, but say we want to look at our number of beds and rooms that are occupied, maybe the average is really important to me to see, do we have the right number of beds and rooms? But also the maximum is pretty important too, because if I'm considering cutting it down, currently I think there's 6 beds and 4 rooms, so 10 total. So this average might suggest to me that we have too many. But then if I go look at my maximum, I can now see that, well, at least a couple once we're getting up to 10, and we're frequently, at least at one point during an hour, getting above 5. And it depends on the staffing model, that answering that question, do we have enough? It kind of depends on the staffing model. And now I have a sense not just on if it ever gets up to 10 or 9 or 8, but how many hours it might get up to that. So this just gives more information on how this actually system is performing. And, we can do it for the number of patients discharged per hour. Again, any of your type of statistics you can use in dashboards. And this data is coming, like other statistics, the data in the dashboards is coming from your pivot grid. It can be kind of a lot to look at when you have it broken up into 24 1-hour periods. But for example, this is the doctor scheduled utilization. And we can look at the average, minimum, maximum, and half width for all 3 scenarios in just the same way that you would any other statistic. You can also export the summaries or the details if you want to create your own confidence intervals or anything like that. And then I can also filter, oops, sorry, wrong one. I can filter, and maybe I just want to look at what the shift results look like for, say, length of stay or total time and system, and compare that, to the overall runtime observation or runtime average or things like that. So I will say this a lot, and I think I started with this, but the thing about periodic statistics is that they are very similar to the other types of statistics. You have a lot of the same capabilities in terms of data generation and analysis and dashboards, but now you're able to look at it in a larger sense or a more detailed sense per whatever period of time that you want to specify. So you have all the same capabilities, but to get more information, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where I wanted to start, is to highlight all of this information that you can collect and generate and report using periodic statistics. And now we'll go back and actually show how you might create one or implement one. So I'm going to go back to my model, and like the other types of statistics, periodic statistics lives in your definitions. So let's say I wanted to create a new one from scratch. I would just come up here into my statistics in the definitions tab and create a new one. And now I have the ability to specify all my different properties. And again, your periodic statistic has to be connected to another type of statistic already in your model. I'm going to choose in this situation that I want a tally statistic. So that's the first property you have to define, is this element type. So a tally statistic. And then based on this example, we had some statistics that were already made that I haven't made a periodic statistic for. So I'm just going to pick this one, time weighted for beds, because that is a tally statistic. And if I go over and look at my tally statistics that already kind of exist, we can see that the time weighted for beds already has its unit type specified. So you don't need to do that in the periodic statistic. And then kind of as we go through the different definitions, one thing we can specify is this anchor date. So this is basically saying when you want your shift or your period 1 to start, your first period. So this run start time in this model is midnight. And so right now, all the shift-based schedules that all of the shift-based periodic statistics that I've made, shift 1 starts at midnight. But let's say that actually, in actuality, we kind of consider the 8 a.m. shift to be shift 1, the daytime shift. So I could specify that I wanted an anchor date that's not the run start, and I can change it. And originally puts in whatever the run start time is, but let's say I want it to be 8 a.m. instead. So now I can specify when it is that shift 1 begins, or period 1 begins. The next kind of property is the period length repeat group editor that I have. And this kind of says how are the time period patterns. In this case, we're going to continue on with the shift. So we have 3 shifts, and they are 8 hours, but like any other kind of time, you can specify different units if you want. I can also specify offsets, like say I don't want shift, say I want like 8 to 9 a.m. to just not be collected at all for whatever reason. Maybe we're closed. Then I can have a time offset before the first period starts of 1 hour. Or I have to consider lunch or breaks. So I might have a time offset between, or a time offset after. I'm going to keep this one simple just for demonstration purposes, but there is a lot of information in the Simio help on periodic statistics that goes over examples of these different period patterns and offsets and shows a lot of visuals of kind of how they look. And if I have time at the end, I will definitely point that out again, but I just wanted you to know that this was an option. And then I can also have multiple, kind of period patterns where maybe one day it's 3 and the next day, maybe on the weekends, I only have 2 12-hour shifts or things like that. So this gives a lot of flexibility. Again, in this case, I'm going to keep it simple, but in other types of applications, like if you're closed for part of the day or things like that, this gives a lot of flexibility to specify those different period patterns. But so I've done what I needed to do here. I also want to go ahead and keep my repeating pattern. So every day it'll just repeat these shifts. And I'm going to rename. So my periods are automatically named. They go from 1 and they increment. So I'm going to name this one shift adjusted because now it's not the same setup as my previous ones. So I just want to remind myself of that. I can turn on logging of raw statistics. If I want to utilize my periodic statistic logs, then I can do that. Then just go ahead and set that to true, but you can always leave it as false. And then I can rename mine, and I'm going to name it time weighted for beds _ adjusted shift. So I'm trying to just keep it really clear, kind of the information that I want. So I've now created my periodic statistic. It's pretty straightforward, but there are kind of a lot, or not a lot, but it has a varying number of definitions. This is how you would go about doing it if you wanted to just create it in the definitions tab, but it's really nice because you actually can go ahead and connect these to data tables and generate your statistics through your data table. So if you were here 2 weeks ago for the data generated modeling Simio solution series edition, then you'll have seen kind of how you can use data generated models. And I think Liz talked about generating elements. Well, here you can generate periodic statistics and go ahead and connect them to all of the different properties that need to be defined, and then the repeat group that it needs. And it's nice because this data table already exists, or the data table schema. So if you want to, you can just go ahead and create it that way. And you can also bind it to a data table. It definitely makes anything when you want to change or add a lot of statistics, it makes it significantly easier because, like I said, now all of my definitions were automatically kind of set reference to the data table. So that is really powerful and very useful. And if you haven't done much with data generated modeling, I would definitely recommend going back to watch the one from 2 weeks ago to get more information on that. But so now I've created it, I want to make sure that it's working. So I'm going to go ahead and run my model and fast forward. And again, in live demos, I hope it worked properly. So I'll go into my results, and now I see that I have a time weighted for beds, and this is a tally. So that's what I wanted. And now I can look at, just like any other statistic, I can look at the average, minimum, maximum, and observations, both for the shifts, the adjusted shifts that I made, but also for the entire run. So this is pretty beneficial to me, and I now know at least that it's working, but I want to make sure that I set up my shifts appropriately, because if I didn't, then I'm not going to be able to understand my data. So I'm going to go back to my facility window, and I'm going to get out of 3D. I'm going to go down a little bit. And I had kept these hidden originally, but I have started the process of creating some status labels to kind of get at this. I want to make sure that I set up my shifts appropriately. And so now I can show you how the different functions that correlate to the periodic statistics that you can use either in collecting data or using status labels or things like that. So the biggest thing that I'm concerned with at this moment is making sure that I set up my shifts correctly, that my anchor date is working. So I'll go over here into this expression editor, and I'm going to find the statistics that I made. Oops, that was the regular statistic that it was already connected to. But here, this time weighted for beds _ adjusted shift, that is the periodic statistic that I made. And when I put a period there, I now have all the functions that I might want to reference. And again, I don't have enough time today to go over all of the functions that are available to you. So I recommend, again, if you want to learn more about that, the Simio help page defines all of the functions that you have available. In this one, I'm going to specifically look at the period number. So this is the shift number, or which number we're at based on this point in time. So when I click accept, I'll go ahead and I'll run and see. And this is what we expect right here. It's between midnight and 8 a.m. And we should be in shift 3 because our offset or our anchor date says that shift 1 should start at 8 a.m. So we know, or we believe that that is working as intended, and we can keep going. And then we see at 8 a.m. it changed to shift 1. So that's good. So that's really good. We believe that this is working appropriately. And then just to show some other type of functions that you can utilize for your real-time or business graphics, I will go ahead and show also the average time waited for a bed in that period, in the current period that we're in. So that's pretty straightforward. It's just time waited for beds underscore adjusted shift dot average. So this shows me the average for just this period that is currently in. And then to continue on to make sure that everything is working kind of as I intend, I'm going to go ahead and put in a statistic just for the regular type of tally statistic for the total average time waiting for a bed across the entire run length up to that point. So that's just your standard time waited for bed average. So then I've set it up. I go ahead and run it, and I'll stop it a bit just to make sure, again, that we're looking at it the way we want. Shift number 3. We're still on that first one, that first shift of the run. So right now, our average time in queue for this period and our total average are the same. And that is exactly what we would expect. So I can just keep running it to see. And then once we move into that shift 1, that's when we start seeing that these two are different. And again, this is just helping me make sure that both I understand that it's behaving appropriately and can demonstrate some of the functions that are available to you. So that all makes sense. We're seeing this behavior that we expect. And now I can show some other ones as well, just again to demonstrate some of these capabilities. So now if we're looking at the average periodic and total average time in system, or the length of stay over here, we can use status plots or also status labels again. One of the features or updates that I made to this model is I added some breakpoints, a breakpoint every hour, just to demonstrate more clearly how this works. So I'm going to go over to my breakpoint window and pull it up so that I can turn it back on. Previously it was turned off, so I could run as long as I wanted to without really an impact. But I want to turn it back on now so I can make sure that everything is running as I expect it to. So it stopped at the hour. So we're still in that first period, that hour 1, midnight to 1. And I want to look at the current hour average, like length of stay. And again, it's the same right now because we're on the very first one as the total average length of stay. And then I can also, once we get to that second day, I can start collecting the average across all hour ones so far that have run. And in the same way, I can sort of look at this data in a status label so I can see visually what's happening. So for the first hour, we saw that they were the same, but now that we've run a second hour and they start differing, blue is the periodic and red is the total. So again, now that I've checked that everything is behaving as I expect, and I get it a few times, I'll go ahead and turn my breakpoint off again, and I will just run it over time to kind of see how my system is behaving. And if this makes sense to me or it doesn't, you know, we can see lots of dips and valleys in our average time in system, also in the length of stay. And we can easily compare how the overall average is as how the hours are doing. And you can see pretty easily, you know, if this is a higher performing hour or a lower performing hour. And now that we've gone into day 2, we see now that we can access this average length of stay across all of the periods of the like 7, 8, or 9 periods that have occurred so far. So again, this is pretty helpful for modeling and for verification and validation, and to just get a sense on how your model is behaving. You can do this with any of our status labels, any of our status plots. Another example, like I had said earlier, maybe you want to look at the maximum, not just the average. If we want to see what is the maximum number of beds and rooms occupied so far in a specific shift, and use this kind of status label, so I get a sense of how much these are being utilized. Again, so you have these different status options, which is really nice. So yeah, so this is pretty convenient. And again, if you want to know more about those specific functions, I definitely recommend checking out the Simio help page. And just like in the other types of statistics, we can also, like I showed, go into our results and look at them for the individual. For the single run, I might not be making a lot of decisions based on this data, but say I'm trying to figure out what are some appropriate staffing models I might want to do more analysis on. This kind of data really is helpful and takes a little bit less time to generate. And I can also create a dashboard report in my single runtime. In the same way, I can look at my shifts and my hourly number of patients discharged. And all of this data is, coming from the periodic statistic logs, just like any other type of statistic. I know I said this a lot, but I think that really is one of the main takeaways about periodic statistics, is that they are very similar to other types of statistics. They just generate the same types of data, but for just that specified period of time. And you used to be able to do this. It just took a little bit more work. Use a combination of timers and or monitors, and maybe some process logic or output tables or Excel write steps or things like that. You could generate this data, but now Simio just makes it easier to do that. And I think that is something that is very nice, since again, most systems provide or involve some level of time variability. And again, this wasn't exactly a tutorial. There's a lot of information that I am not able to go over. So there is a Simio Simbit on periodic statistics that I definitely recommend checking out. And also the help page is pretty well, has a lot of information on the different components, how you can pull data. And I think a really, really nice component is kind of a visual demonstration of these anchor and time offsets. And then if you have, say, multiple different periods of multiple lengths, in this example, it's representing months in a year. So I would definitely check that out for more information. You are obviously also welcome to email in to Simio support. And I think with that, I have time for questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. So we have multiple questions, or actually a whole bunch of questions, so we'll get to those. But first, I want to commend you on saying statistics so many times without muttering over that word, because that's not an easy word to say as many times as you said it. So that was very nice.
I probably should have kept track.
You said it a lot. You didn't flub it once. So very commendable. One comment that came in. I'm assuming you're using the latest version of Simio because the new expression editor might be a little bit confusing to people that are using an older version, because you have a multi-line expression editor.
Yes.
Can you just comment on that very quickly?
Yes, so the multi-line expression editor is very convenient, especially as I was going in to show you some of the different the different expressions. For those of you that haven't, or I think it came out a few sprints ago. I'm not entirely sure which sprint, but it is new, and I definitely recommend it. You can pin it, or you can keep it locked here, or you can unpin it and you can make it bigger, smaller, however you want. It, in my opinion, really is a game changer. Some of these, let me find an example, can get kind of clunky at times. And so it's really nice having this really awesome expression editor. So
Perfect.
definitely
Perfect.
recommend.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, so on to some of the questions. So early on in your presentation, you were showing the hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, hour 4 in one of the charts. And the question that came in for your dashboard, are you able to reformat the labels so that they can actually mean something to potentially not the modeler, but an end user? In other words, instead of it saying hour 08, can that say between 11 a.m. and 12 a.m. or between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. or something like that?
Yes, so in the single run dashboards, it is a little bit more straightforward because it's pulling out of the logs themselves. So there is kind of a start time or end time kind of functionality. In the experiment dashboards, it's a little bit more complicated as we do not do logs for the experiments, because that would be a lot of data being collected. If you have 100 replications and it collects every single statistic. So there is a way to do it. There are a couple of different ways you can create, maybe using your data table like state names, or use a data federation to connect like an Excel column, a column in an Excel document. But if you want to learn more about that, I did actually create an example a few months ago. So if you want to email in to support, or email Dan or me, whoever asked this, I would definitely be happy to give you more information on how to do that. You are able to specify period names. You can change their names instead of hour 1, but it's just the prefix. So it'd be hour 01. So that's why I wanted to start at midnight, because I think it is a little bit easier to think about it in that way. But there are ways to do it. Again, feel free to email in.
Perfect.
I'll go
And what I'm
through it
going to do is, yeah, what I'm going to do is once we're done going through the questions, I am going to bring up my slide presentation again very quickly, because I did have a typo in your email address. So I'm going to bring it up at the end so that everyone can have the actual real email address for you and not the fake one that wouldn't get to you. All right, so on to other questions. Can periods be defined for something like holidays or day after holidays? And do specific dates need to be entered?
Yeah, so I'll, again, for these kind of period patterns, that this is where you kind of might be looking at having these specific period patterns and how they can be different lengths of time, or you might have offsets. And again, for something, if you're looking at an entire year, I would definitely recommend using the data generated approach and creating, an Excel table of this specific time period patterns and how they work, so that you can connect it. I think that would make it a lot easier. And so that is definitely possible using the repeat group editor. So I would recommend checking this out further. Again, it does a pretty good job of explaining and showing the visual of how you might want to do that.
All right, perfect, perfect. Our next question, tally statistics record data every time an event occurs, correct?
Yeah, so tally statistics, I think that Adam might have mentioned this in his first Simio solution series. I'm just doing lots of kind of callbacks, but a tally statistic is kind of like throwing it in the bucket. So every time, so we looked at time and system. Every time a patient departs, that gets tallied. And it just, for the periodic statistics, it only gets tallied if it occurs in this specific time period. So in every patient that departed the system in the first hour, their time and system gets tallied for that hour 1 time and system periodic statistic. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. Do the response results, box and whisker plots, contain percentiles? Which results are these plots generated for?
Yeah, so if we go over to the response results, so I specifically did the shift average time, like in the shift base, so it would be easier to look at. Instead of having 24, I would just have 3. We can look at these SMORE plots, and yeah, so this is the different staffing scenarios down at the bottom. So 3 nurses, 3 doctors, 4 nurses, 3 doctors, 4 and 4. And this is the average time in system for shift 1. And so you can add in, you know, kind of the different observations. You can do, again, how you would normally do, say, your total average time in system.
All right, perfect. All right, what's the mean about? All right, looks like we've addressed most of the questions. I'm going to leave the queue open here if anyone wants to type in any questions. I'm going to steal control back for a second, Katie.
Yep.
So that I can show, once again, your actual correct email. Let's see if we can do it again. Hopefully
We
it's
have
not
a
going to
nice pair of last names, Dan. We don't make it
Yes.
easy for everybody.
No, absolutely not. I bought too many vowels, and you have 3 letters that shouldn't go together. So, there's Katie's official name with an S, not a Z at the end, and it's KIFKOVITS at simio.com. So there's her address if you want to get a hold of her. And then I think since I'm able to advance now, let me just go to what I was trying to say earlier that wouldn't advance you. So there's our future webcast series that we have on the calendar now. Like I said, June 30th, July 14th, July 28th, those are the ones that are upcoming.
I will say, just to give a preview, or not a preview, but for the best practices modeling labor, I know I talked a lot about modeling labor, but never actually got to the point where we're looking at, you know, shifts with different number of resources or workers. And that is because that will be the main focus of the next webinar on June 30th. We'll be looking at different work schedules. So it leads
that
in
is what
very
you that is what you call in the TV biz a teaser. There you go. I like it. We're getting good at this. All right, a couple more questions have popped in here, Katie, as my slides are up. So I'll let you grab control back if you need it. Is there a way that they can get percentiles for any statistic, say 95th percentile for shift
1? So if you were in your response results, so you want the 95th percentile. So yeah, so this data is available, like, oops, sorry, clicking kind of mindlessly, but in your response results, if you want to export your details, that's the data, that's where that data lives. So if you want more data, just like, again, any other statistic, you could export the details and pull out, you know, the data that goes into making these SMORE plots.
All right, perfect. And we got to thank you on that one, so we addressed that question. All right, can the statistics tell us when the peak period occurs, say peak 60 minutes or peak 10 minutes of a simulated day?
Hold on, let me think about this for a second. So looking at when the peak is, I mean, you could pull out that data, say, if you, again, are looking at your hours, which hour is the peak? I'm trying to think if you could, I might have to think on this one if you want,
okay.
On how, like, an expression, if you want to pull out that itself, if you want in your response results to be which shift was the peak. I might need to play around and think about that one a bit, but you can definitely get this information, but whether or not you can make it like a response result, I'm not positive.
Okay.
But so that's a great question.
All right, so what I'll do is I will put back to the questioner there, since you have both my email address and Katie's email address, feel free to send us that question separately and we can get that question addressed. All right, one more question popped in here. It's a long one. Let's see. Can the periodic statistics such as LOS be collected by the time patient arrives in addition to the time they leave the system. For example, if you arrive between 10 and 11, what is your expected LOS? Does that make sense?
So like you want their LOS based on the time they arrive to be in that bucket and the bucket based on when they leave. The way the statistic is currently set up, the way you would normally do, sort of a time system, that is only like, with this example, thrown into the bucket once they leave. So it is put into that statistic. But if you manipulated your statistics like a little bit differently, you could get that information. It would just involve not necessarily manipulating the periodic statistic, but manipulating the length of stay statistic that you created. Because again, these periodic statistics are connected already to the other types of statistics that are already created. Again, how many times can I say statistics in 1 hour? But that is another really good question, and I could definitely think more about how you might operationalize that in Simio.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, we are running to the end of the hour. It looks like the questions have, the faucet has stopped with the questions. For anyone that is watching this recording on the website, you should have plenty of information on the way to contact us. If you are watching this session live, obviously our information is out there. You can go back and get it, either going back and watch the recording, or hopefully you jotted it down at the beginning or when I brought it back up. The one suggestion I would have for anyone that is watching this recording or that has attended live and is going back and watching the recording, obviously we love to have you live at these events because that gives you the ability to ask questions as we're going through versus kind of watching a session, seeing what questions were asked, and if your question wasn't asked or addressed, then obviously it's hard to get back in touch with us, or it might be harder than actually just typing the question in during the live event. So we're happy to have you live. We'd like to have you live. The more the merrier. The more questions, the better. It keeps it going. One thing popped in here. Someone's asking for the final example. I will state this again, as I stated at the beginning, just so in case you joined a little later. The webcast will be live on Simio.com, or the recording will be on Simio.com shortly. We will also have a link on the Simio.com site with the actual file from today's session. Any prior session, this similar stuff occurs or similar situation occurs, that the recording's out there as well as the file from the recording. So it should be out there within, usually we try to get the stuff out there within about a 24-hour period. So hopefully by this time tomorrow, the recording and or the files will all be out. So, all right, looks like that's it. Katie, great job today. Thanks everyone for attending live. If you're watching this recorded, thanks for watching our recording, and we look to see you again, hopefully in 2 weeks, for the session on the modeling labor, as Katie had given a precursor for. So thanks again, Katie. Thanks for attending, and we'll see everyone in 2 weeks. Goodbye.